Have you ever been sitting in a meeting or maybe having a really tense conversation with a partner and you just totally blurt something out that you instantly regret?
Oh, absolutely. We all have.
Right. Or maybe you mysteriously sabotaged a really good career opportunity, or you found yourself just completely blindsided by a colleague's toxic behavior, and
Yeah.
you're just standing there wondering, like, what in the world just happened?
It's a profoundly universal experience,
Yeah.
really. I mean, we hit these invisible walls, either with the people around us or even within our own minds, and we're left with this lingering sense of confusion.
Yeah, and helplessness, kind of.
Exactly. Because we realize we don't actually understand the forces driving the situation.
And we usually just latch on to whatever the easiest, most comforting explanation is. We tell ourselves, oh, well, my boss is just a textbook narcissist, or, I don't know, I was tired. Something just came over me.
Right, which is just a defense mechanism.
Totally. But let's be honest, that doesn't actually solve anything. So today we are going on a deep dive to pull back the curtain on those hidden gears of human behavior.
Yes, and we're drawing from a really fascinating source today, Robert Greene's extensive text, The Laws of Human Nature.
Right. And our mission for this deep dive is to figure out how you, the listener, can stop being a passive victim to these invisible forces. We want you to learn how to actually decode them in real time.
And to set the proper baseline for this undertaking, the source material brings in this brilliant piece of advice from the 19th century philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer.
Oh, I love this part.
It's great. He suggested that when you encounter any special trait of meanness or stupidity in someone, you must be very careful not to let it distress or anger you.
Which is easier said than done, obviously.
Oh, for sure. But he says instead you need to treat it like a mineralogist who has just stumbled upon a brand new, very characteristic specimen of a mineral.
I mean, you just put on your little metaphorical lab coat, pull out your magnifying glass, and say, fascinating. Look at this incredibly dense specimen of pure human irrationality.
Exactly. It completely removes the emotional sting from the interaction.
It creates this instant analytical distance. But to actually become that objective mineralogist, we kind of have to start by admitting a rather uncomfortable truth about ourselves.
We do.
Mm.
And that truth is that we are not nearly as rational or in control as we like to imagine.
Okay, let's unpack this, because I definitely like to think I'm the driver's seat of my own life. I
Yeah.
make my coffee, I choose my goals, I do my work.
Well, we all share that illusion. We imagine that we consciously and deliberately plan the course of our lives. But to understand the mechanics of what's actually driving our daily reactions, we have to look, well, about 5 million years into the past,
Right, going way back out.
way back.
Yeah.
We have to examine how we evolved as a highly vulnerable social animal. Because long before the invention of language, our earliest ancestors had to coordinate their actions on an incredibly sophisticated level just to survive a hostile environment.
Because, I mean, a single human out on the savannah is basically just an easy snack for a predator.
Correct. Survival absolutely required group cohesion. So early humans evolved these incredibly complex emotions: joy, shame, gratitude, deep resentment.
And since they didn't have words to say, like, hey, I think there's a lion over there, those emotions had to be transmitted instantly.
Yes, through facial expressions and body language, it was a biological broadcast system.
A survival mechanism to bind the group tightly together.
Exactly. If danger approached, the tribe needed to feel fear as one single organism. If there was a victory, they felt joy as one. And here's why this matters for us today.
Because we still have that wiring.
Right. Because of this deep, ancient evolutionary wiring, we are still incredibly permeable to the emotions of others. We unconsciously imitate the people around us, we absorb their anxieties, and we get effortlessly swept up in viral feelings of anger or outrage.
Okay, hold on. I'm struggling with this a bit. You're saying my desire for a promotion or my sudden anger at a coworker is just my brain doing a 5 million-year-old chimpanzee imitation.
Well, it is.
Because that feels incredibly reductive. I mean, it's like I'm driving a modern high-tech sports car, but suddenly I realize there's this 5 million-year-old hidden passenger in the back seat who is secretly reaching up and yanking the steering wheel.
That's a great way to visualize it.
But if we are just biologically wired to mirror other people's outrage to survive, is free will just a total illusion?
That is the core tension of human nature, really. And it's a completely fair pushback. But free will is not an illusion. It simply requires an enormous amount of awareness to access.
But we have to work for it.
Exactly. What you're describing as that 5 million-year-old passenger is what the text refers to as the lower self. It's animalistic, It's reactive, it seeks immediate pleasure, and above all, it desperately wants to conform to the group.
And the source also mentions something called the shadow personality, right? How does that fit into this lower self? Because I've heard the term, but it usually just gets thrown around as like repressed dark urges.
Well, think about the mechanics of early tribal life. Because early humans had to maintain absolute group harmony to survive, they had to quickly suppress any selfish, aggressive, or socially unacceptable impulses.
Right, to avoid getting kicked out of the tribe and, eaten.
Exactly. But all those repressed urges don't just magically disappear. They get shoved down into the unconscious mind, forming what Greene calls the shadow personality.
Okay, making sense.
And our ancestors actually understood this shadow force, but they thought it came from literal demons and spirits that needed to be exorcised.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Today, we lack that mythology, so when our shadow leaks out, we just shrug and say, I don't know, something came over me.
So the lower self is our biological default, which begs the question, if this lower self is hardwired into us, is it even possible to override it? Or are we just doomed to act like overly anxious apes in business suits?
It takes immense deliberate effort, but yes, it is possible, because we also possess a higher self, which is drawn to deep connection, long-term thinking, and self-awareness.
And to see what it actually looks like when someone successfully weaponizes that higher self, the source looks at a leader who managed to do this during one of the most chaotic crises in ancient history.
Yes, Pericles of Athens.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because the contrast here is just wild. Take us to Athens.
All right, the year is 432 BC. You have a looming catastrophic war between two geopolitical polar opposites. On one side, you have Sparta.
The ultimate military land power, brutal, highly disciplined.
Right. And on the other side, Athens, a wealthy democratic naval power that leads a vast league of allied states. And the Spartans have just delivered a harsh ultimatum to Athens. Agree to our restrictive terms, or it is total war.
And so the Athenian assembly meets on the Phoenix Hill to debate what to do. And you have close to 10,000 male citizens crowded together outdoors.
Which is an incredibly volatile environment.
Utter chaos. You've got the political hawks screaming, let's attack Sparta first, show them our strength. And you have the doves pleading, no, accept the peace terms, war will ruin the economy. It is total emotional chaos.
The lower self is completely running the show there.
Exactly. And then Pericles steps forward.
And Pericles was an incredibly peculiar leader. You see, in the early days of the Athenian democracy, the people historically loved dramatic, risk-taking leaders.
They love the showman.
Exactly. Men who chased battlefield glory and whipped the crowds into a frenzy to support narrow political factions.
Guys who basically thrived on dividing people and playing to their tribal instincts. But Pericles didn't do any of that, right?
Far from it. He came from an aristocratic family, but he strategically allied himself with the working classes, the farmers, the oarsmen, and the navy.
A completely different approach.
And he actively limited military campaigns to avoid needless deaths and overextension. Plus, when Athens accumulated a massive surplus of wealth from their empire, he didn't use it to buy cheap political favors or fund endless wars.
Right. He put the craftsmen to work building magnificent public works.
Yes, which leads to the Parthenon.
But that architectural choice is deeply symbolic of his entire psychological makeup, isn't it?
It really is. Pericles worshipped a philosophical concept called nous, which is the ancient Greek word for mind, or pure intelligence.
It's like a force that creates meaning and order out of chaos.
Exactly. And for Pericles, this was perfectly embodied by the goddess Athena.
And the source mentions he had this massive 40-foot statue of her constructed inside the Parthenon. Just an absolute monument to this idea.
Right, because Athena wasn't a deity of bloodlust or blind faith like the god of war. She represented a very practical, calm, rational intelligence.
The strategist.
In the old myths, she was the quiet voice that came to heroes in times of desperate need, orienting their minds toward the perfect strategic idea for victory. Pericles wanted to invoke her exact spirit to unify the chaotic city.
So, on that hill, facing an existential threat from Sparta, he addresses this screaming mob. And his strategy is just a masterclass in this unemotional, Athena-like rationality. What does he actually propose?
He tells them, do not fight Sparta on land. That is playing into their strength, and it is suicide.
Right.
Instead, he says, we are going to bring everyone, all the farmers, all the livestock inside the impregnable city walls. We will let the Spartans march in and literally burn our empty fields. We will not take the bait.
That is bold.
It is. His plan was to use their superior navy to supply the city by sea and conduct targeted attacks on Spartan coastal towns until Sparta simply runs out of money and their alliance fractures.
Just think about the emotional restraint that requires. To sit behind a wall and watch your ancestral farm burn to the ground and do nothing.
It goes against every instinct.
Totally. And to maintain this mindset, the text notes that Pericles used to literally lock himself in his house for days on end just to avoid the emotional contagion of the political mob.
Yes, a very deliberate isolation.
Which is wild. I mean, think about how hard it is for you to just put your phone in the other room when there's a massive viral debate happening on social media. You feel this desperate pull to look, to get angry, to join the crowd.
We all feel that pull.
Right, and Pericles was resisting that exact biological pull on a massive geopolitical scale. But it makes me wonder, was Pericles just an unfeeling robot? Does tapping into the higher self mean we have to kill our emotions entirely?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the answer is a resounding no. Pericles wasn't motionless. He felt the anger and the fear.
So what was his secret?
His brilliant innovation was that he simply refused to make a decision while under the influence of a strong emotion. He trained himself to never react in the moment.
He'd hit pause.
Exactly. Instead, he would retreat, and he would analyze the mechanics of his feelings. He looked closely at his own anger or his insecurities, and usually found that under rational scrutiny, they weren't justified.
They were just the 5 million-year-old passenger throwing a tantrum.
That's it. And once he observed the emotion, it lost its power over him.
He subtracted the emotion to see reality clearly, and his strategy worked. Athens held strong, Sparta was getting frustrated, the plan was flawless until Pericles wasn't there to enforce it anymore.
Right.
Which brings us to what happens when a society completely loses its connection to that higher, rational self.
And this is where the story takes a really devastating turn. Because in the second year of the war, a horrific plague hits Athens.
Just brutal timing.
And because Pericles' strategy required everyone to be packed tightly inside the city walls, the disease finds the perfect breeding ground.
It's a biological nightmare. The plague bounces between them in a closed biological echo chamber, and their emotional panic does the exact same thing.
A third of the city dies, including Pericles himself. And without his grounding presence, the Athenians instantly regress to their lower selves.
They need a scapegoat.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They blame him for the plague, they abandon his cautious defensive strategy, and the city descends into a hyper-emotional, greedy delirium.
Which sets the stage for
A
disaster.
massive one. Flash forward a few years to 415 BC. Driven by pure hubris, the Athenians get this wild, irrational idea to launch a massive naval expedition to Sicily.
Specifically to conquer the wealthy city of Syracuse, which is, by the way, hundreds of miles away and a critical ally of Sparta. It's just a massive escalation.
The Athenian logic was purely emotional. We take Syracuse, we get endlessly rich, we add to our empire, and we magically cut off Sparta's resources. So they excitedly vote to send a fleet of 60 ships.
But one of the senior commanders, a man named Nicias, thinks this is a disastrously bad idea.
Because it was. He knows they're vastly underestimating Syracuse's strength.
So how does he try to stop a mob that is already dreaming of gold?
He attempts to use reverse psychology. He stands before the assembly and essentially tells them, listen, if we're going to do this absurd mission, 60 ships isn't going to cut it. We would need a massive, unprecedented armada of at least 100 ships and double the amount of troops.
Wow.
He fully expected them to recoil at the immense financial cost and the sheer danger of deploying that much of their military.
Wait, so his plan to talk them down was to make the price tag so absurdly high that they'd sober up and back off. Did it work?
Not even slightly. Because their minds were completely clouded by the lower self, the lure of easy riches and guaranteed victory. His logical argument had the exact opposite effect.
Oh, no.
The mob didn't feel fear, they just felt more excitement. They simply voted to double the size of the expedition and give him the 100 ships.
And they just said yes. That is terrifying.
It shows the power of the lower self.
The text describes this incredibly cinematic, haunting image of the streets of Athens, filled with people of all ages, young men, old men, just excitedly drawing maps of Sicily in the dirt, dreaming of the wealth they were about to plunder.
Completely detached from reality.
Yes. They launched this dazzling, massive armada, and it is a total, unmitigated slaughter. The entire fleet is trapped. The army is wiped out or sold into slavery.
Complete collapse.
By 405 BC, Athens is completely starved out and forced to surrender to Sparta. The empire is dead. Just incredible.
And this historical tragedy highlights a crucial psychological phenomenon that the source explores, called the blame bias.
Okay, what is that?
Humans possess a deep biological hatred of admitting our own irrationality. When things go spectacularly wrong, our lower self immediately looks outward for the cause.
Right, it's never our fault.
Exactly. We blame bad luck, we blame antagonistic forces, we blame bad advice. The political leaders in Athens all thought they were highly rational actors, and when their reckless maneuvers led to absolute chaos, they simply blamed the opposition factions or the gods.
I mean, I completely do this. I'll be vulnerable here. If a project I'm managing at work completely tanks, my brain immediately goes to, well, the client was totally unreasonable, or the timeline was rigged from the start.
It's an automatic reflex.
It really is. It takes actual physical effort for me to sit down and admit, no, my strategy was just flawed. I made a mistake. I never want to admit I was the irrational one.
And the text makes a brilliant connection between this blame bias in the fall of Athens and a much more modern disaster, the 2008 financial crash.
Oh, that is a fascinating parallel.
Yes, the parallels are striking.
Yeah.
Now, just to be clear, we are neutrally reporting on the source's psychological breakdown here, not endorsing any specific political stance on financial regulations.
Right, we're just looking at the human behavioral engine behind it.
Exactly. If you look at the mainstream media narratives and the political investigations after the 2008 crash, the blame was placed everywhere except on basic human nature.
They pointed fingers at the mechanisms, right?
Yes. They blamed the availability of cheap credit. They blamed complex financial derivatives. They blamed corrupt Wall Street insiders and a lack of government oversight.
They ignored the engine itself.
Precisely. What they conveniently ignored was the mass, deeply irrational contagion of easy money that infected millions of regular, everyday buyers and sellers.
The emotional frenzy?
You had a nationwide frenzy where people completely ignored the obvious mathematical risks of no money down mortgages.
Because everyone else was doing it, group cohesion.
Exactly. They ignored decades of historical warnings, the 1929 stock market crash, the 1987 bubble, the dramatic collapse of long-term capital management in the 90s.
The collective lower self just kept chanting the delusion, housing prices never go down.
It is the exact same hubris as the Athenians drawing maps of Sicily in the dirt.
So what does this all mean? We've seen how these hidden forces can literally burn ancient empires to the ground and crash modern global economies.
That's heavy stuff.
It is, but I want to bring this down to the ground level for you, the listener. How do you apply this code book of human nature to your everyday life to protect yourself and actually thrive?
Well, the very first step is transforming yourself into that calm, strategic observer we mentioned earlier, the mineralogist.
Right, the lab coat approach.
When someone in your life is acting aggressively or being deeply toxic towards you, our immediate biological instinct is to take it personally. We evaluate the threat in terms of, do they like me or dislike me? What did I do wrong?
We make their behavior all about us.
But the psychological reality is that their anger, their frustration, or their passive aggression usually has deep roots stretching back years, if not decades.
Way before we ever entered the picture.
Exactly. They're experiencing desires, traumas, and disappointments that long predate your existence in their life. You just happened to cross their path at a particular moment of stress and became a highly convenient target for their shadow personality to lash out at.
Wow. Internalizing that fact liberates you from taking it personally.
It physically stops the emotional drama from draining your energy, allowing you to just observe them.
You look at them and think, wow, what a fascinating mineral of unresolved childhood trauma. I mean, that is a superpower.
It really is.
Now, the source also talks about a practical tool called reading the opposites. What is the mechanics of that?
It is a way to decode the masks people wear. When people overtly display extreme performative traits like hyperconfidence, aggressive hypermasculinity, or a constant need to prove how nice and selfless they are, they're almost always concealing the exact opposite reality underneath.
Overcompensating.
Exactly. The overt behavior is a diversion tactic to disguise a deep insecurity in their shadow self. If someone is overcompensating loudly, train yourself to look for the quiet, fragile insecurity they're desperately trying to protect.
That's an incredible hack for judging character in a business negotiation or like a new relationship.
They're useful.
Now, the source also emphasizes cultivating empathy, but it makes a point to define it not just as a warm, fuzzy feeling of pity, but as a serious cognitive analytical tool. How do we actually do that in real time?
Empathy is a latent power developed by our earliest ancestors to intuit the subtle moods of the tribe. To actually cultivate it as an analytical tool, you have to do something very difficult. You have to actively cut off your own incessant internal monologue.
Okay, stop right there. How do you actually cut off the internal monologue? Because if I'm in a heated argument, my brain is usually racing at a million miles an hour, formulating my next brilliant comeback.
That is exactly the loop you have to break. You have to force a pause.
Like Pericles.
Exactly like Pericles. Instead of thinking, what am I going to say next to win this argument? You must actively shift your internal voice to ask questions about the other person.
Be curious.
Yes. You ask yourself, what is their underlying insecurity right now? What are they afraid of losing? And you use your own past pains as a baseline analogy.
Oh, I see.
If they are acting defensively, you remember a time you felt cornered and defensive, and you map that feeling onto them. It's a continuous dynamic cycle between your gut intuition and rational analysis, which prevents you from rushing to a rigid, dismissive judgment.
You are actively diagnosing them instead of fighting them. I love the mechanics of that. But I have to ask one last thing.
Sure.
It is incredibly easy to sit here listening to this and think, wow, this is great. I'm going to use this on my irrational boss and to psychoanalyze my ex who is totally ruled by their lower self.
Oh, of course. We all want to apply it to everyone else.
Right. But how do we force ourselves to confront our own dark side, our own lower self, without just spiraling into immense guilt and feeling depressed about how flawed we are?
What's fascinating here is that truly recognizing our own deep flaws does not create guilt. It actually creates profound relief.
Wait, really? How does admitting you're irrational bring relief?
Because we are all cut from the exact same evolutionary cloth. We all have a shadow. We all have passive-aggressive tendencies. We all crave status.
It's universal.
Yes. Actively trying to maintain a falsified image of being a perfectly rational saint is psychologically exhausting. It burns immense energy.
That makes so much sense.
When you finally drop that pristine image, you accept yourself as a complete, complex individual, incorporating both the good and the bad. It makes you humble. It makes you genuinely whole.
And you stop pretending.
Exactly. And ironically, people are actually drawn to that level of self-acceptance and authenticity. It frees you of the burden of your own hypocrisies.
You stop playing defense all the time, and you can actually just live. That is incredibly powerful.
It's the ultimate goal of understanding human nature.
All right, let's quickly recap the journey we've been on today. We started by realizing that we aren't totally in control. We are driven by ancient 5 million-year-old emotional wiring that makes us deeply susceptible to the viral moods of the crowd.
Yes, the lower self.
But by deliberately cultivating our inner Athena like Pericles, by stepping back, analyzing our emotions, and refusing to make choices in the heat of the moment, we can actually decipher the real motives around us.
And by dropping our own exhausting self-righteousness, we become immune to the mob mentalities that destroy empires and economies.
It is the ultimate transition from being a passive, confused slave to human nature to becoming an active, strategic participant in it. And that brings us to a final provocative thought for you to chew on as you go about your day.
Leaving them with some homework.
Exactly. In the source material, there is a brilliant quote from the playwright Anton Chekhov. He said, "Man will only become better when you make him see what he is like."
Such a great quote.
So here is your challenge for the week. Think about the last time you made a terrible decision, something you deeply regret. What if you viewed that past version of yourself not with deep shame, but exactly like Schopenhauer's objective mineralogist?
Looking at it objectively.
Yes. What new mineral of human stupidity or insecurity did you discover in yourself that day? And more importantly, how can you use that exact discovery to build your own inner Athena tomorrow?